Hey everybody, I just finished watching the Murders at Starved Rock documentary on HBO. And I kind of checked out some reviews and whatnot on YouTube, and I just saw a lot of summaries, not a lot of analysis. Because when you watch true crime, you want to know, what do you think? Who done it? So I wanted to just share my brief thoughts on why I came to the conclusion that I think Chester is more than likely guilty, or he's at a minimum, he was the main culprit. He might have had accomplices. So it's a documentary on HBO. It's 3 episodes. It's definitely worth a watch if you like true crime. It centers around the vicious murder of 3 women in the Starved Rock State Park in Illinois in 1960. The story is told to us by David Racuglia, who is the son of one of the prosecutors on the case, where Chester Weger was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison, though he was recently paroled, I think last year, after 60 plus years in jail. Well, right about exactly 60, I think. I won't go into summary, as I assume you've watched the series and are here to share your thoughts. So here's mine. First of all, the series overall, it was actually one of the most balanced true crime stories I have ever seen told. Sure, they started us down this road of, this is what they, as in the police and prosecutors, say what has happened. This is the evidence they presented. Here's the conviction. And then the next episode is the what ifs, the other sides, all the people raising questions, including David Racuglia, against his own, with his own father being the most vehement supporter of keeping Chester Weger in prison all these years. But the 3rd episode is where we really get to the good stuff. So basically, you really need to see it all. I know some people have said that they feel like it's too long, that they could have just summarized it all a lot better, but I don't think so. I think it's real important for storytelling to tell a story as you see it one way, then you see it from the other side, and then you see, hey, let's go in here and let's be unbiased, and we're going to poke holes in everything here. And I think once you do that, you can see that there's, at least for me, that there is this truth in here that I think is lurking. And so we'll talk about that. First of all, Weger's interviews from the early 2000s, it struck me right away as manipulative. Now, I know it was very emotionally charged. I guess it struck David, and to the point where he actually thought pretty much right away he had a suspicion that Chester was innocent. But for me, having had experience with narcissists in my life, it raised alarm bells. And then, of course, as we go on through the story, we learn that these new alibis and this that he's changed his story over those previous 40 years at the time. And then we learn later on in the 3rd episode that David was receiving letters from Chester for years after this, and they're dark. So I think what happened is this narcissist has his walls up. He's got how he wants to portray himself when he sees someone face to face. But then in the letters, he's letting it guard down, and he's letting little insights here and there slip about his true, what's really going on upstairs, which is anger. Okay. So, and that's one of the hallmarks of narcissism, is anger. And, so one, I think he's performing, and the other, he's unabashedly angry. And he wrote these letters. He might have reread them, and he still folded them up, put them in an envelope, licked the stamp, and sent them. And that says a lot about his perspective, that he can't say, hey, this isn't going to look good when I send this. So it does, and a narcissist have a hard time seeing things like that, because they don't affect empathy. They just use, they know how to do it, but they don't actually implement it. So he wasn't able to actually see, hey, when I send this letter, how's this going to look from his perspective? And again, that's something that leads me to suspect that he's a narcissist. So his changing stories, he adds this alibi that even though he had like an affidavit for it 40 years later from a 90-year-old man with scraggly writing, remembering one guy he gave a haircut and the tens of thousands of haircuts he probably gave in his career. It doesn't seem very believable. And the fact that none of this is mentioned in any of the court records. His lawyer, who was, for all intents and purposes, from what I can understand, at the time of the trial, was a dogged lawyer. He believed he pushed the police corruption narrative that they had forced this confession, but at the same time, they didn't try to suppress it in the hearing. They had a 12-hour hearing about this confession, and it's never mentioned that he was allegedly beaten, even though they had pictures of him without his clothes, without a shirt on, all sorts of stuff. And there's alternate alibis never mentioned. The only alibi that's ever found is the one that was given in the trial in any of the records. And I feel like a lawyer would have pushed those things. A lawyer would have said, hey, I can get this confession suppressed. And if that had happened, he would have walked. Almost undoubtedly, he would have walked. Okay. So in the third episode, they reveal a letter that they read to Chester, now, however old he is, 80 something, 90 years old, that he denied writing. This letter basically states that he cryptically implies, it's Weger talking to his father in 1960, and he's cryptically implying that he was involved in the crime, but not the one who did it. And the filmmaker goes on to suggest, well, maybe he was threatened by this accomplice, this other guy, one of two possible accomplices. And the one with the car, I can't remember his name. But for me, it's just like, I don't feel like that was what's going on here. I think everything here is explainable by Weger being a narcissist. First, his interviews with David, designed to manipulate him, and they did. The letters revealed the darker reality. There's the comment he made when it's mentioned that since both he and his son are registered sex offenders, all right, that's a whole other story. Like, these guys are, ugh. Anyway, they're not allowed to see each other or contact each other at all. So Weger cuts in. It's his daughter and his niece talking about it. And Weger cuts in, it's fine. He just cares about his freedom. I just care about my freedom. It's fine. I just care about my freedom. It's like, why would he say that? That's like another insight into his mind. There's no empathy there, okay? Someone who's actually self-aware would, even if they felt that way, they would still say, oh, it's a real tough situation, man. It's really hard on us. But somebody who actually doesn't care and doesn't recognize that he should care, a narcissist, will let things like that slip sometimes. And that is self-interest. He doesn't give a hoot about anybody but his freedom. That's all he cares about. And finally, his confession is the big issue. So his confession is centered around him saying that it was a robbery, and then how he led up to the robbery, how he got the bodies into the cave, and why he did that. But the truth is, the reason, and I do believe the confession is mostly false, and the police probably knew this, and I know the prosecutor knew it because he admitted to it, but this is 1960. All right, there was a lot of concern about these women's families knowing that their mothers were raped and murdered, beat to death, okay? It was easier for them to believe they were robbed, just a victim of a brutal robbery. They don't have to know what actually happened, and I think that's why everyone went along with it. And the reason Chester did it, A, because he knew how it would make him look. B, because he'd had a history of it before as a juvenile rapist. And then C, he knew it was going to give him the electric chair. So I do believe that if really his buddy was the ringleader, that he would have confessed. But I guess he would have pushed it on that ringleader. But I bet you that buddy might have some. It's possible that buddy might have some sort of physical evidence and was sitting on it the whole time. So maybe that was why he didn't try to go ahead and pin it on one of his buddies, whether they were involved or not. We can't be totally sure on that. But here's the thing. So people would ask, why would he agree to have this DNA tested? Well, first, supposedly the hair was looked at and it was deemed that it wasn't his hair by the prosecution's lab back in the 1960s. But I don't know how much I believe that. There's supposedly hair from two different people. So we'll see what happens when the DNA test results come back next year. But as far as why he would allow the DNA test to go forward, I think it's because he's hoping that it is one of these other guys that will pop up, and there's a lot of money involved. If he can somehow say that this exonerates him, I don't think it really does. But they say that if it can't exonerate his conviction, then he'd be looking at massive settlement, probably like $1 million a year or something ridiculous. So, but here's the thing: I don't think even if the DNA isn't him, that it exonerates him, because all it does is show us that the confession was false, and we already knew it was false. All right, it doesn't. If his DNA is not on this hair, that doesn't mean that it wasn't him. And I do believe we can find through relatives of these other two men that are the other lead suspects, whether through their sisters, their cousins, and their descendants. We should be able to say within a reasonable certainty if it is these guys' DNA as well. And but here's my theory: he done it. He did it. He's been lying about this whole time, mainly because he's embarrassed. B, because he didn't want to get an electric chair. And the reason narcissists lie about stuff like this is they, all too often, they'll do something wrong. Like, let's say you have a narcissist spouse who's been cheating on you and gaslighting you and telling you you're crazy, you don't trust me, blah, blah, blah. Well, the reason they do that stuff is because in their heart, they don't believe they're a bad person. They don't think, they know what they're doing is wrong, okay? But they don't believe that makes them a bad person. So that means they don't deserve whatever punishment or judgment you're rendering onto them, because that judgment means you think they're a bad person. So they'll tell any lie, that defends this view of themselves, that they're a good person, okay? And that's like the heart of like this behavior, I think, with Chester. He thinks he did something that was just, one-time thing. He doesn't deserve to be punished for the rest of his life for it. That's not who he is. He's not a bad person, okay? But the truth is, it does make you a bad person. You are a bad person. And these are all just the mental hula hoops some people do when they're in denial. So, all right, so yeah, I'm interested to see what you guys have to say. Leave a comment down below, and we'll talk about it. And we'll see what happens when the DNA comes back. All right, thanks for watching. Bye.